Hi everybody, I'd like to welcome you to a new course by PACKT Publishing. Now in this video we are going to take a look at what this course is about, who am I and what I do, what we will be building, and who this course is for. Now before we get started, I think it would be fair if I introduced myself, so without further ado, my name is Vedran and I'm the co-founder of a web development company from Croatia, and we create awesome websites and mobile apps. Now I've been creating websites for around 15 years and I've been using Bootstrap exclusively for around 4 years. I've also written some interesting articles about it, so I think I have a pretty good handle on the Bootstrap framework, and I hope I get to transfer some of that knowledge to you guys. Now, if you need a bit more background about what we do and how we do it, you can always go take a look at our website over at flip.hr. Now, to move on to the Bootstrap framework. So, we will be taking a deeper dive into the Bootstrap framework, which means this course might not be suitable for everybody, especially for somebody who doesn't even know HTML or CSS. However, I will try to keep it as light as possible so that potentially everybody can follow what we do and learn something new about Bootstrap. Now, the way we are going to be learning about what Bootstrap can do and what we need to know in order to use Bootstrap is by developing a custom CMS interface. Now, I've chosen a custom CMS interface rather than, let's say, a traditional 5-pager website or a marketing template because it allows us to explore everything that Bootstrap has to offer and all of its components, both CSS and JS side. Because as you might imagine, in a CMS, you will probably use forms, you will use tables, you will have custom buttons, modal windows, JavaScript elements, and stuff like that, whereas on a regular website, you might not have some of that functionality. So I'm going to show you the CMS that we are going to be building just so you get a sense of what it looks like so you know what to expect. So without further ado, this is our PACKT CMS, which is basically just an imaginary CMS for the PACKT publishing guys. And this is just a simple login screen with some form elements on it. Then we have our own dashboard page with some dashboard widgets, a sidebar menu, and of course, table list with some nice styling and options like sorting and searching by columns or something similar. Now, I'm just going to show you briefly these 3 pages. Of course, we will be covering and developing a lot more than these 3 pages. But for now, you know how it's going to look and what you can expect. Welcome back, everybody. In this section, we'll be setting up our project. We will see the importance of a layout in a form and see an example of a placeholder form falling apart. We will see the use of helper classes and create our first login page. And today we are going to take a look at how to download a custom version of Bootstrap and what are some common best practices for folder and file structure. Now, if we go to the website getbootstrap.com, by default you will see this download Bootstrap button at the very top of the page, which coincidentally for now we are going to ignore, because we want to get ourselves a custom version of Bootstrap. So basically the customize section allows you to turn on or off any of the components or styles that you might need or not need in your project. So as you can see, you can, for example, turn off tables, nav bars, popovers, and whatever you want and need. By default, everything is turned on, and below you could even change the default Bootstrap styling, which I suggest you don't unless you do know what you're doing. And of course, if you are grabbing less version of Bootstrap, you will be able to change this on your own later on. So for now, we are just going to turn off glyph icons, and we are going to press compile and download, which will basically give us a zipped folder like the one that we have here. Now, before we move on, I just want to imply that we will be using a custom icon set here instead of the default glyph icon set that comes with Bootstrap. And the reason why we are going to be using Font Awesome is because it has 605 icons in its icon set, and it's totally scalable and vectorized. And the beauty of it is you can use it with CSS, so it's basically an icon font, which means you control all the styling through CSS. So again, if we just download Font Awesome by pressing on this download button, it will actually give us a zipped file like here. So if we unzip Bootstrap, you will see that you get a CSS and JS folder, which has a lot of CSS files, and the only one that you need is bootstrap.min.css. And this is the minified version of Bootstrap, which means you just copy and paste this in your project. There is no need to ever change anything here. If you need to change any styling of Bootstrap, you either write custom CSS code that restyles whatever Bootstrap has, or you change the variables on that download page. So you only need to copy bootstrap min.css. This is the non-minified versions, and this is the Bootstrap theme that you don't need in most cases. The same goes with JavaScript. Basically, this is the non-minified version, and this is the minified version. Now, if you extract Font Awesome, you will see that it comes with a CSS folder, fonts folder, less, and SCSS folder. The only folders that we are going to be using is the fonts folder, which you need to completely copy to your project because it contains all the different web font variants, and the Font Awesome min.css, which is again a minified version of the icon font, and there is no need that you ever need to touch this file. Now, I've created a folder in my local host called PACKT CMS, and I've copied all of those CSS and JS files right here. So basically, as you can see, my folder structure has CSS, fonts, JS. Inside my CSS folder, I have bootstrap.min.css, fontawesome.min.css, and style.css, which is our custom CSS file, which will hold all the rewrites and custom styled CSS code. And basically, you always want to include this after Bootstrap in case you need to change the default Bootstrap styling. The font simply holds all the Font Awesome icon set. JS folder, for now, it's missing the bootstrap.min, so I'm just going to copy it right here. So as you can see, it has a bootstrap.min.js and a custom JS file called jQuerySite.js, which is going to again house our custom coded JavaScript for this project. The only thing that we might be missing here is an images folder, which will house all our images. So if we open up the index page in our favorite text editor and briefly go through the whole HTML structure of our boilerplate file. So I've included only the things you will need for now, which is basically the charset, which you always want to define, title of course, and then the meta viewport tag. Now this is something that you need to use with Bootstrap if you want your websites to be responsive. So what this basically does, it sets the width of the browser to whatever the device width is, and it sets up some scaling properties like initial scale, minimum, and maximum, which basically allows Bootstrap to render according to the screen size. Then we have the CSS includes up top, which is very important for you to put it up top in the head. And first we have our custom font that we'll be pulling in from Google. Then we have the Bootstrap min.css, our font awesome, and finally our style.css, which are, again, you want to include after Bootstrap, because if you ever change any styling that Bootstrap has by default, you want to have it applied after Bootstrap. Now, another good practice is to always put JavaScript at the bottom of the page to avoid page blocking and speed up page rendering. So basically, we included jQuery, which is needed for Bootstrap, then Bootstrap, and again, our own custom JavaScript file. So for now, this is everything that we need to know about setting up our project and creating our first index.html page. And we can move on to our next video, which is going to be about creating a login page. So I will see you there, and again, thank you for watching. We're back for a new video called Creating a Login Page. Now today we are going to take a look at the basics of working with Bootstrap forms and using our own custom code with Bootstrap. Now last time, in our last video, we've just created our project, added Bootstrap to it, and now we are going to expand on that code and create our login page. Now before we start building, it's always a good idea for you to think about what you're building, because you'll have a better understanding at what you need to do. So for example, we are building a login page which will probably not have a lot of content. It will only have an email field, a password field, and a login button. We might add some header information like what's the name of the CMS that we are building, but basically that should be it. So knowing that, it doesn't make sense to use the default Bootstrap grid, which is 1170 pixels, which will be too wide and it'll just look weird. So in this case, we're going to use our own custom container, and we are going to combine it with a Bootstrap form. So we are going to create the form right here. I'm just going to delete this, and I'm going to copy a piece of code that I've already written, and basically I have a login page container, a header container with some information about the CMS, and a form box container which has the form. Now I've laid it out like this because we want this to be at least 460 pixels wide, and we want to style our form in a way so that we could reuse it later, which we will explain later on. So if I copy and paste this code right here, let me just align some things. It's always a good idea to align the code as best you can and to make it as readable, not just to you, but to anybody else who might be reading your code. Now the same goes for comments. I comment out each ending of each div element or any other element that makes sense. Now if we take a look at this, we will see that it doesn't look like much. We have our default form styling. It looks a bit weird, everything is inlined. And now what we're going to do is apply our custom styling to the page only, just so you guys see how that looks. Okay, so we're going to open up our CSS file, and in this CSS commented block called login page, I'm going to paste this login page container, which only styles that container and the header information. So as you can notice here, I said that we are going to have this at 460, I think, so let's keep it that. And I've decided to position this absolutely because I want this centered on the page both vertically and horizontally, just to make it look really nice. So if we take a look, it looks a bit better. So what we are actually missing is the actual form styling. Now, this is the big moment where we actually transform this form with some Bootstrap classes. Okay, so every input with a label and an input field has a form group. So we are going to add a form group to each of our input fields. And of course, I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to add some padding to it, just so the code is readable. The same goes here. And now we need to add a class to each form element, which is called form control. And we're going to copy that to the password field and see how this looks. So as you can see, we have some default Bootstrap styling already, and things look nicer, much more nicer already. As you can see, it has a default height, font size, padding, color, and everything else. Now in our case, we might want to change this, which we will actually be doing. So in order to style this, I've decided to wrap the form, as I've said, into a class called form box, and I will target the form control elements inside of that form box. Now that way I could be reusing the code that I write now, for example, for any other page where I will have these input elements. But if I choose to, for example, change something, I will still be able to do that. So if we copy some CSS that I already written and I commented out as form layout, and we paste it here, which basically has some styling for the label, some font sizes, colors, and for the form control element. Now it's important to know what the defaults for Bootstrap input fields are. And for example, you'll find yourself changing the height a lot of the times because it's set to 35 pixels. It also has like a box shadow, border radius, which sometimes you don't need. So you need to dig deeper into the CSS to see what you need to change. But for now, we'll take a look at what we have. Now, as you can see, we already have some nice styling to it, just the way we want it. It's blue color, it's a different border, and everything else. So that leaves us with the login button. Now, Bootstrap also has a class for all buttons, which is basically just the button. So if you apply that class and refresh the page, you'll see that things look immediately nicer. Now in this case, we might want to change this because we want to adapt it to our style. So what we are going to do is create a custom button called button blue. And the reason why I named it like that is because it's actually going to be blue. Now since we might be using the same blue button over and over throughout our CMS, it might not be a bad idea to write that code as modular as we can. So what we are actually going to do is we are going to create another commented CSS block called custom buttons. And inside we are going to have button blue, which is going to have a background and a color. And we are not going to set anything else for that button blue element in here, but we are going to target our login page container and then the button blue to change the styling of some of the things like font size, line height, padding, and uppercase letters. So after our change, what we have is a fully functional and good looking login form which we could use for our CMS. So this is it for this video. I think we have a good basis for our next video, which is going to be more about Bootstrap forms and all the various ways that you could be using Bootstrap forms and everything that you can do with them. Okay guys, we are back with a new video which is called Working with Forms in Bootstrap, and today we are going to take a look at using different form layouts with Bootstrap and using some helper classes that Bootstrap offers. Now, if we take a look at where we left off last time, we have a simple form for our login page that has an email and password field, and currently each input label and input field are in its own row and everything looks nicely. And by default, this is what is called a vertical form in Bootstrap. Now, if we want to, for example, change it to an inline form where each label and input field are next to each other, all we need to do is add a class form inline. Now, if we refresh the page, we'll have a problem, and the reason for that is that by default, once you apply a class of form inline, each input element width is set to auto. So in most cases, you will need to change this to something that will work with whatever you're building. Or we might want to change the container width to something like this, where everything will fit into the form inline layout. Now, this isn't something that you might be using often, but you can still use it. Just keep in mind that if you have multiple form elements, things can quickly get out of control in terms of the user experience if you're using inline forms. Now, another more popular solution would be to use horizontal form. Now, in that scenario, the label is on the left side and the input field is on the right side. So if we want to see how that looks, I'm just going to copy the code that I prepared. Basically, we will be working with the same amount of elements. I've just created this code to make us faster. Now, as you can see, we added a class of form horizontal to our form, and then we have the form group like we had before, and then to our label element we need to add a Bootstrap grid class and the control label. After that, we need to wrap the input field into a Bootstrap grid class as well. So here I've chosen the 2x10 separation of the grid, and you could go with whatever you want. Just keep in mind the count has to be 12 because Bootstrap uses a 12 column grid system. So whatever you do, just make sure it's up to 12. Now, if we take a look at how this looks, you will see we get a nice horizontal form, which is, by the way, much more clearer than the inline form. Now, the third option is something that you also might want to use, and is actually something that I use most often, is a vertical form that we have here where labels are on top of the input field, but we combine it with the Bootstrap grid. So for example, if we want to make this email field 60% of the width and the password field 40% of the width, we could do that by combining the Bootstrap grid. And we are just going to copy and paste this piece of code. It's basically the same form, except this time we have created a new div with the class of Rob, which is basically the default Bootstrap class for the grid system. And then we've separated the two input elements into a div with a class of call-md-6, which is basically 50% of whatever the container width is. So if we take a look at this, you see that we could actually have a vertical layout, but it could be whatever we define it to be in terms of the Bootstrap grid. So if I change, for example, this 6 to 8 and this to 4, again, the count has to be 12, you will see that the email gets bigger and the password gets smaller because we are using the Bootstrap grid. Now, this is something that I use most often when developing forms, especially if I have a lot of form inputs. Now, the last two things besides these form layouts is the form validation states and some helper classes like input add-ons. Now, if you want to add validation states, all you actually need to do, again, we are going to replace this email input with the same piece of code, just with the validation state. Now, to do that, to our form group, we have to apply a class of either has error, has success, or has warning. And that will actually color code this label input field and this help block to the appropriate color. So in this case, it's going to be red, which will indicate the user that something is wrong, like he has entered invalid email or something like that. Now, another thing that might come in handy is if we want to add a little suffix or a prefix to our form input. So let's say we want to add an icon right here indicating that this is a password and we want to visually enhance our input field. So what we would do is actually add this to our code. So what we have is the form group as usual, then a new div called input group, and inside of that div, an input group add-on with a font awesome icon. Now, if we take a look at how that looks, it's something like this. So as you can see, we have a nice icon in front of our input field, and it looks visually richer and nicer. Now, if you want to suffix this, so instead of being at the left side, let's say we want to put it on the right side, we just swap the places and it will be on the right side. Now, of course, we would need to adjust some some CSS code for that because, for example, I'm missing the right border, and this is what I defined right here. So as you can see, I said border right none. Let's just say border left none, and now this should be fixed. So these are the most common things that you will find yourself using with Bootstrap forms. Of course, there are a lot more things that you could explore, like sizing controls, disabled focus state, different input field types, and stuff like that. But in most cases, you will be using what I've just showed you, and it should be enough to absolutely create anything that you might want to do with Bootstrap and forms. Now, this is it for today's video, and in our next video, we are going to talk a bit more about designing and developing more efficient, user-friendly, and better forms using Bootstrap. So thank you for tuning in. Hello guys, and welcome to the last video in our first section of Mastering Bootstrap course called Designing Efficient Forms. Now in this video we are going to take a look at some of the common bad form practices, how to make your forms more user-friendly, and how to follow some good design patterns. Now the reason why I want to take off like 5 minutes of not coding and just talking about the UI and the design is because it's very important in terms of forms, because if you're building a custom CMS interface, or let's say a shopping website, or any type of form where a user has to fill out their information or do something, you as a developer in most cases want to do the best possible job and want to make sure that you don't have questions like, hey, I didn't know how to do this, or hey, this was unclear to me, or the system is not working, or something like that. So we're going to start off with the number one popular issue that I see online and that many have written, and that is the not using labels basically above form fields. So a lot of people would just put a placeholder instead of a label and save on some space or the looks and feels. Now, in this case, you might get away with it because you only have 2 fields, but I'll show you later on what it means to not have labels. So it's always a good idea to have labels on top of the form fields. Now, some people prefer it on the left, but studies have shown that the most prominent place to put it is above your input field. Now, another thing that users like to see is some kind of a response when they click on the form field and that they know which form field is selected. Now, again, you can't see this in action right now because we only have 2 fields, and although we do have like this box shadow, it doesn't mean much because again we only have 2 fields. But if we take a, for example, look at the example that I've built here, which has a really long and big form with a lot of elements, you will see that it's really important to know on which field you are currently on. So it's always good to tell the user, if you have a large form, on what field they are. Now this form again is not the best form ever. I've purposely made it really bad, and one of the reasons that it's bad is because it's spanning across multiple columns, and the inputs are sometimes 3 columns wide, sometimes 4, sometimes 1. So it's really confusing, and the user just can't follow the flow of this form. It actually doesn't have a flow, it just breaks constantly from having 3 input fields here, then 4 here, then some weird elements here and stuff like that. So it's really a good idea to try to keep your form elements in 1, or if you need to, in 2 columns. That way users can easily follow what is going on versus what we see right here. Now, another really popular convention on the web is to include a lot of different form UI elements, like for example these fancy checkboxes, or the use of a plugin called jQuery Chosen, which is really actually handy and allows you to, for example, search for something within a drop-down list or a select list. But sometimes the design of these elements really stands out from the design of the input fields. So you always want to make sure that the form elements you are designing are actually somewhat similar, because, for example, the user might think, okay, this is drawing my attention. It seems to be then more important than, let's say, this. And then, for example, again, we see the usage of a date time picker that looks completely different from anything that we have above. And now we come to this section where I've left out the labels out of these form elements. So if we type in something right here and we say some data just so we can fill it out, and let's say we've filled it out and now we're like moving on with our form and we've changed some stuff here and added some stuff here and changed this, and we're like, okay, so now I want to go back and see if I've entered all the data correctly. And now, as you can see, I actually don't know what this is. I don't know what I was supposed to enter here. I might have entered something that is not supposed to be here, but I don't know why, because there is no label. I would have to delete the text that I've written, and then I will be able to see what is this field and what is going on. So on a very large form like this, you can see that you need to be using labels as much as you can to give users a clear understanding of what is going on, because a user doesn't want to think twice about what they're doing. A user doesn't want to be confused if they have to follow multiple columns of data or understand why this is different than this. They just want to fill their form out as fast and as convenient as possible. Another common example, again, is validation. So as you can see, we are actually validating this form, but the problem is you should avoid it as much as possible. And when I say avoid it, I think you should be flexible in how you actually validate stuff. So if, for example, you can detect an IP address from whatever the user writes it, detect it on the backend. Don't tell him he needs to put dots in between or spaces behind the dots or whatever you need. So do the validation as best as you can, but also try to help the user out by being flexible on some of the fields. Now, I think we've covered a portion of what is really important when designing forms. Of course, there are articles on the internet that I will link below where you can take a lot of examples of good and bad form designs, like, for example, the one that I'm showing you. But the gist of it is try to make the user's job as easier and as possible. If you have an enormous amount of fields like this, if they all need to be on one page, make, at least if you're adding something, make it as simple and as small as possible, and then, for example, add fields when you're editing or add fields in some other step. Don't make the user do 30 minutes of work just to do something on your website. It's just really bad. We have now created a login page. We saw the best design practices for our Bootstrap forms and the guidelines of a better code structure. So I think that we have said enough about forms and good form design, and we are ready to move on with our next section, which is basically building layouts with Bootstrap. So I will see you there, and I hope you've enjoyed the first section so far. Thank you for watching. Bye. Hello guys, and welcome to a new section of our Mastering Bootstrap course. In this section, we'll have a detailed overview on the Bootstrap grid. We'll build form layouts, a dashboard page, a dashboard menu, and a content area. So let's get to it. Today we have a new video called Building Layouts with Bootstrap. And we're going to take a look at the Bootstrap grid system, how to build layouts with Bootstrap, and some layout tips and tricks. Now, before we get started, I just want to take a quick peek at the Bootstrap documentation. And just to remind you of a couple of important things that I really need you guys to remember and know, because it's very important to know this, since we'll be using the Bootstrap grid system a lot in our further videos. So Again, the Bootstrap grid system has a 12-column layout. It has a gutter width of 30 pixels, which means 15 pixels on each side of the column, which is really important to remember. And it has some responsive breakpoints that you can use, and each breakpoint has its own class. So this would be a mobile phone class, this would be a tablet class, and this medium class is the one that we'll always be starting off with. So as you can see, by default, the container for call MD is actually 1170 pixels. Now, it doesn't make sense to start off with call LG, because in most cases, if you have a design that is greater than 1200 pixels, nowadays it's mostly considered to be a full screen or a full width design. So it's safe to start off with call MD as your main class for your columns, and then go down to, let's say, the tablets or mobile phones. So what we are actually going to be taking a look at is how to create some simple grids with Bootstrap. So I've created a sample page within our PACKT CMS project, and for now we just have 4 columns with a title and some paragraph text. So if we take a look at how this actually looks, you will see that we are using the container. Again, after the container we have a row, and then after a row we have our column. So if we take a look at the code that Bootstrap generates, you will see that a container, again, is 1170 pixels wide, and it has a padding left and padding right of 15 pixels. After that we have a row, but this time with a negative margin of minus 15 pixels, which basically cancels out the one before. But then you have padding 15 set on each column, again left and right, and if we turn it off you will see how it looks and how it behaves. So you always want to follow this container row column for the Bootstrap grid, just to make sure that everything is properly aligned and that you can nest multiple rows inside of a container or multiple columns inside of one column. Of course, you can define your custom container here. We've already showed you how to do that, but again, you can use a container fluid, which, if we take a look, is 100% of screen. So it's not 1170 like it was, it's actually just 100% of the width of the screen. Now, let's say we want to adjust this for a tablet size, which is around 768 pixels to, again, 992 or something like that. So for now, you will see that everything is, again, 100% of the width, and this is the default Bootstrap way of resizing to a smaller size, but we could easily change that if we add call SM6, and keep in mind we are changing from a 4-column layout to a 2-column layout, because it makes sense to do that on a tablet just because we don't have the same amount of room. So if you take a look at how this looks, you will see that actually on a tablet this looks much nicer. If you go to a phone size, since we haven't done anything, it will be 100% of the width. Now let's say we want to create another row of these, but we want to add a background color to our whole container. So the best way to actually do that is if we just copy and pasted this code, but before, let's wrap it into sample hero, which will actually apply the background on. So, and we copy and paste our code here. We just fix some indentation problems that we have like this, and voila. If we take a look at our CSS, I've already written a simple sample hero container class, which just basically has a background, a bit of padding, and some margins. Now let's take a look at how our code looks. It looks pretty good. And now we can actually try container fluid just so you see the difference. So as you can see, it is a lot less more because it's actually using 100% of the screen plus, like we talked about, 15 pixels of padding on each side. And the last thing we want to do here is try another option of the grid system, but this time we want to make sure that we, for example, can change the padding or remove the padding. So I'm just gonna copy and paste this whole block again at the bottom. I'm gonna remove some stuff so we don't need container fluid. Let's just leave it at this. Here we go. So let's say that we actually want to remove these margins from the grid system, because in some cases, in some designs, you actually need to do that. So we first have to create some classes, which I did. So no margin and no padding, which basically sets padding left and right, margin left and right to 0. And now we need to apply. So for the container, we need to apply no padding. For columns, no padding as well. And for the row, we need to apply no margin. And again, we can run this down to all of our columns and see what happens. So as you can see, our columns are now wider, much more wider than we need them to be. And since we've killed the padding, the whole container is actually much more wider than it was. And this is just a sample of how things will look if you actually try to change that gutter width. Now, if we take a look at how this looks on a mobile phone, you will see that it's actually, for now, bad because there is no margin and there is no padding, and we need to add it on a mobile size if we want to. But on desktop, if we need to actually put something together, we can. And believe it or not, some designs usually require it to do, but now you know how to. So for now, I think we've covered enough of the Bootstrap grids, and we can move on to custom layouts and Bootstrap and see what else can we do with the Bootstrap grid system. So I will see you soon, and thank you for watching. Today we have a new video called Custom Layouts in Bootstrap, which will basically be an extension of what we did in our previous video. And today we are going to talk about how to define custom layouts and how to hack the Bootstrap grid system to do what we needed to do. So to start off, let's define a custom container in Bootstrap. So basically, the way we would go about doing this is we want to create it so that it's as modular as it can be, which means we want to create the foundation once and we want to be able to reuse it multiple times after. So we've started off with creating a custom class that is named container-960, where we want to imply that something is 960 pixels wide. And the rest of the code is just pure vanilla Bootstrap. So the real magic is happening on the CSS side, where we've created two new CSS selectors inside of our custom containers block. And the first one is saying something like target everything that starts with container dash followed by whatever, in this case a number 960, apply padding left, right, and set the margins to 0 auto, just to make sure it's centered. And then we've created our custom class that has a max width of 960 pixels. And the reason why we are using max width instead of width is to make sure that this is actually responsive. So when you go down below 960, this container will simply become 100% of width. Keep in mind, this class will inherit everything that this CSS selector has because it's starting with container dash something. Now, if we take a look at how this looks, you will see that we have a container that is 960 pixels wide. And if we go to our responsive design view, you will see that this simply becomes 100% the width. Now, since we created it in a modular way, we can easily add multiple other containers, like, for example, 460 pixels, and just change the CSS class name. And if we refresh the page, you will see that now it's 460 pixels wide. So this should be good on the custom container class section, where we've now learned how to do it in a very modular way. And now we can move on to a really interesting example that you might find yourselves using. So one of the challenges that you have to face when you're doing responsive design is how to move things around when you're going to a smaller size. So in this case, we have two sections, one above here and the one below, virtually the same, but actually really different. If we take a look at them in our responsive design view, you will see that the first section starts with the sidebar area, and the second section actually starts with the content area. Now, this is really interesting if you, for example, have a blog, and let's say you have your main article area right here, and on desktop, it's okay to have it on the right side, but on a mobile phone, you want the user to first read the article and then, for example, go on some other related list of articles that you might have in your sidebar area. Now, the problem of doing this is, of course, if we simply define it with Bootstrap as colMD3 and colMD9, since this is first or before the content area, it will always come first when you go down to a smaller size. But luckily, we have a way around this. So if we take a look at our sample2.html, you will see that the first example has a container, row, and then colMD3 and colMD9. So of course, when you go down to a smaller size, whatever you do with this, you can even apply col SM or XS12 or whatever you want. It's not going to make a difference because it's always going to be in front of the content area. Now here in the second example, we've actually put the content area first in HTML and the sidebar area second. But we've used some Bootstrap magic to make sure that this actually looks good on a desktop and looks good on a mobile phone. So as you can see, we've defined the content area as colMD9, but we've added a special class that comes with Bootstrap, colMDPush, and we've pushed it by the width of this sidebar area. And on this sidebar area, we've actually made a pool of 9 columns. So if we take a look at the CSS, you will see that on desktop, since we're using MD as our main class, this column is 25% wide, but is moved 75% from right, and the content area is 75% wide, but moved 25% from the left. And that's why on a mobile view, you get something like this. So now you know how you can hack your way around some responsive issues that you might run into. And the last thing we want to check out is basically how to use some popular jQuery and JavaScript plugins with your layout. So Bootstrap 3 for now doesn't come with Flexbox, which would allow you to have different height columns that would really look nice. In Bootstrap 3, if you have 8 columns in which have different sizes, they are going to break. But if we add a plugin called Masonry, they will actually not break. So in order to do that, all we need to do is write again a container, a row, and some columns. But this time we've added a Masonry grid class to the row and a grid item to the columns. We've done that for all the columns in question. And of course, just for styling, we've included a sample box with some colors. We take a look at how this looks, you will actually see that it looks pretty nice. And the reason is we've included a plugin called jQuery Masonry that actually changes the position of elements using JavaScript. So if you take a look at the source code of sample 3, you will see we have JavaScript included at the bottom for Masonry, and we've defined the Masonry init code here. If we, for example, comment this out just to see what happens if we don't have Masonry, you'll see that the layout actually breaks because all the columns have different heights. So you would see that this is 1, 2, 3, and this one should actually be in here, but it won't because these two are not the same size as this one, so the layout breaks. Again, if we just turn on Masonry, you will see that everything works and the layout is completely adjusted by JavaScript. So as you can see, everything is positioned absolutely and has top left or bottom right properties, which really comes in handy if you're creating really beautiful and interesting layouts. So I think we've covered everything that we need to know regarding the Bootstrap grid system, and we are actually ready to move on to creating our dashboard page and working with our PACKT CMS further on. So I will see you in our next video, and again, thank you for watching. Welcome back to a new video in our Mastering Bootstrap series, where we will be creating our first page, which is going to be the dashboard page. And today we will be using everything that we've learned before in order to create our page, which is basically working with the Bootstrap grid, defining our custom layouts, using various Bootstrap components, and stuff like that. So before we get started with the building part, I just want to show you how this will look. So basically, this is our dashboard page and essentially a layout base for our future pages. As you can see, we have this sidebar on the left side, and then let's call this the content area to the right. Now, we are going to be using a completely custom layout for this, and we'll be mixing Bootstrap for some of the stuff inside of this content container. So this sidebar right here is actually positioned fixed. That means whenever we scroll, it is going to stay absolutely in the same position and not scroll as we scroll. The same goes with this title area right here. So we needed to use a custom layout to do that, as well as do some cool effects on a mobile device like a tablet, where basically we hide the menu by default, and then when you click on a button, it actually shows the menu. So we can now get started with building, and I'm just going to save this document, and I will be copying the complete sidebar code, and then we'll take a look at it together. So to save up on time, I'm gonna paste this here, and we'll take a look at what is going on here. So basically, in the sidebar container, I'm supposed to add a page container to this so that we can wrap this inside. Okay, great. Now we should be good. Inside of the sidebar container, we have this logo area, the blue one, which basically just has a title. Then we have a drop-down menu, a Bootstrap drop-down menu, which uses the default Bootstrap components of drop-down, but it's styled rather differently. And the way we actually style this is by overriding any Bootstrap code. So as you can see, I wrapped it in a div called user meta, and then I'm targeting this button here, which is the one that holds my name and my privilege level, and I'm applying some custom styling like padding, font sizes, backgrounds, and stuff like that. And of course, we have to do the same to the drop-down menu. So we are basically again targeting a Bootstrap default and overriding it with some controls that we want and styles that we basically want. After that, we have an unordered list, which is going to be our main menu, which is going to hold all the modules that we'll have in the CMS. And again, I'm just custom styling this the way I want, which is basically applying various font sizes, colors, and things of that nature. We've also used the Font Awesome library that I've mentioned to add icons to every module just to make it a bit more interesting. Now, if we take a look at what we have for now, you will see that we have the sidebar menu completed. And if we take a look at the sidebar container code, you will see that is positioned fixed. It is positioned left 225 pixels with the width of 225 pixels. And the reason why it's 225 is we've actually added padding left to the page container. And now let's add our content container, which is basically going to be after the sidebar container. Let me just clean this up for a bit. So we need it here, and then this goes inside. Again, indentation is really important so that everybody who is reading your code can do it with ease. So inside of the content container, we have our page title area, which, if we remember, is going to host the navigation and the title of the current page or module you're on. And we've added this mobile menu, which is basically a button that opens and hides the menu when you click on it on a tablet or a mobile device. And if we take a look at the CSS code, this is going to basically be hidden by default and only shown on tablets and mobile devices. Because we don't need it on a desktop, we will have the full menu. After that, we're just adding some title, and we're using the Bootstrap breadcrumb component, which again, we are styling as we need and as we want right here. We will, of course, take a deeper look at each of those components, but for now, that's what we're using. And then inside of our content inner, which is basically a div which has some padding and margins, we've set up container fluid, which means that the width is going to be 100%. we've wrapped the whole row into stat boxes class, and then we've created 4-column layout for our little stat widgets. So basically we're going to display how many books are in the system, how many videos, authors, and how much revenue are we making each month. Now if we take a look at how this is basically looking, we will see that we have everything ready. And again, if we take a look at how this maybe looks on a tablet, we'll see that it doesn't have the left menu by default, and that this icon of a mobile menu is shown, and when you click on it, we basically show the main menu. So here you can notice that on a tablet size, we're actually using a Bootstrap grid class of call SM6, which will make a 2x2 row. So as you can see, fairly quickly and easily, we have a base for all our future pages, and we can start building some more pages. Now, this might be a bit overwhelming for you because there's a lot of code and a lot of things going on, but we will go through each of those important Bootstrap components. For now, all you need to know is that we have combined our own custom layout with the Bootstrap layout like we did before. So this should do it for the next video. This should do it for this video, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Hello guys, and welcome back. Today we start section 3, which is going to be all about tables, how to create tables, how to use Bootstrap to transform tables, and how to use some third-party JavaScript plugins to enhance our already created Bootstrap tables. Now we will start off with a video called Creating Our First Table View, where we will take a look how to integrate tables into a custom layout, how to properly set up a table in HTML, and finally, how to use Bootstrap to quickly transform the look and feel of our table. So let's get started. And we're just going to quickly remind ourselves of where we left off last time, and which is basically we created a dashboard page that you see here, but we also essentially created a layout base for all our future pages. So all our pages will have this sidebar container right here and this page container right here with the content here. So what you actually want to do is just copy the dashboard page, rename it to authors, and open it up in your favorite text editor. So if we open up this page in a browser, you'll see that for now it has no indication that you are actually on the authors page. So what we want to do is we quickly want to change some things like the title. So let's change it here. Then in our main menu, we want to indicate with a CSS class that this item is actually the one that you are looking at. And of course, we want to indicate the user in the breadcrumb navigation that you are on that page. And that's the reason why we didn't add a link to authors, because we are already there. So if we refresh the page, it looks a bit better right now. So inside of our content inner container, I think we can write out our first HTML table. Now we are going to write the basic markup, which includes a table element, the head element for the header, and then just to make it a bit faster, I'm going to copy and paste all the header elements that we will have. So they are status, which is just going to be an indication of whether the author is active or inactive, name, surname, email, country, and actions. Now in actions, what we want to allow the administrator to do is, for example, edit, delete, ban, or do anything else with the current row of data that he has. Now keep in mind, we are creating basic and table, but also we want to build this out as modular as we can so we can reuse the same code in future and, for example, in more complex scenarios. So what we are going to do next is just copy some dummy data. Okay, so as you can see, for the status column, we are using Bootstrap labels. Now you can find more information about Bootstrap labels on the Bootstrap website, but basically, as you can see, it gives you a really nice representation of some content that is important and that you might want to highlight a bit. So what we will actually just be using for now is going to be a span with a class of label and then label success or danger or whatever we need. After that, we have my first name, my last name, my email address, what country am I from, and now we come to the actions column. Now, as you can see, I've created a drop-down menu and it has edit and delete for now. The reason why I use a drop-down menu instead of, let's say, just listing all the options here is because in future you might want to add something new and that might not fit in the current layout or something else. So let's say if you want to ban somebody from accessing the website, you can easily just add that to the drop-down menu and, let's say, add an icon to it, and that's it. But basically this is a button group. Default Bootstrap markup has a button of actions and a drop-down. So if we take a look at how this actually looks, you'll see it doesn't look very pretty. The only thing that actually looks good is the label and the actions bar. Now, this is where Bootstrap magic comes into place. So if we simply just add a class of table to our table, this table will start looking much more better right away. So I've also generated some dummy data right here. So I'm just gonna copy and paste it a bit more just so we have better overview of how things look when there is like actual data inside. Keep in mind, it's always good to test with actual data inside your layouts. Okay, so as you can see, we added a bunch of data, again, random data, and we do have our table. So the only thing that we actually need to do is we need to style it a bit for now. So if you take a look at the code that Bootstrap adds, it actually adds a lot of the code, and some of it is actually going to be dropped in version 4 and simplified, but for now, this is how you would style, for example, tbody td element. And by default, Bootstrap adds a border to it, as you can see, and 8 pixels of padding. So you can't use margins with tables, of course, and table rows, so it won't do anything. That's why there's padding, to make it a bit more spacious, of course. So if we just copy and paste some styles that I already wrote, it's very short, so I'm just going to paste it in our CSS folder file, and I'm going to refresh the page. And now this looks a lot better than what we had. So the menus are better, the table head element is much more better, the labels are better, and everything simply looks great and looks adorable. So if we take a look at what we actually did with the CSS is I just basically targeted a table element. Again, I know that we will be using tables throughout the system, and I want to keep that look and feel consistent throughout all of the tables. I'm targeting a table element, tbody, tr, and I'm just resetting the background to white. I've also added a custom style to the table heading elements and to the table body elements. So as you can see, I added some font sizes, borders, and uppercased the headings and also the body rows. And then this is just styling for the label, just to make it a bit more prettier, and of course our actions drop down and our actions button. So this is for now everything that we're going to cover in this section. As you can see, we actually managed to create a really good looking table in a matter of minutes. So next time we are going to take a look at how to work with different table layouts and create responsive tables as well. So thank you for watching and stay tuned. Hi everybody, today we continue learning about Bootstrap and tables. So we will learn how to quickly change the look and feel of our table by applying various Bootstrap classes, how to make the tables responsive, and how to add pagination to our tables. So in our last video, we basically made this table right here. So as you can see, it looks really good, but Bootstrap allows us to quickly change the look and feel of this table. So if we go to our code, we'll see that for now, our table has a class of table, which is basically mandatory if you want to use the Bootstrap CSS on a table. Now, if we want to, let's say, add borders to this table, all we need to actually do is add a new class after table, which is called table border. And if we take a look at what we've done, we will see that our table is now, of course, bordered. The whole table has a border, and each of the TD elements have a border. So to make it more simpler for a user, what it would be good is to have every second row in a different color. So maybe when the user is looking at the table, he can see the data more clearly. So with Bootstrap, again, all you need to do is add, again, another class that is called table striped, which is like this. And if we refresh, we see that every second row, or every other row in this case, is actually in a different color, which makes it easier for the user to focus on a specific row or in a specific row of data. Now, Bootstrap has two more classes for tables that we can quickly check out on the Bootstrap website. The first one is table hover, which again you add just by adding a class of table hover. And it will give the user a nice visual effect when they are hovering over the row, making it easier for them to spot the row that they are looking for by changing the background color of the complete row. Now, the second class that we have is table condensed. Now, what this table class simply does, it reduces the padding of the TD elements in the Bootstrap table from 8, as you can see here, to 5. Now, if we go back to our example, and if we take a look at how this maybe looks when you are on a tablet, you will see that actually we have to scroll the page. And if we go to, let's say, even on a smaller size, you will notice that we have to scroll the page left and right. So let's try to fix this. Let's try to make this table more responsive. So the way we would do this in the current version of Bootstrap, and this is going to change in the future, is we would wrap the whole table into table responsive. Let's just indent it a bit so we know we have a div in front of it, like this, and close it out and comment like this. Cool. So now if we take a look at how this looks on a mobile phone or a tablet, you will see that actually the page is 100%, but the table has overflow Y set to scroll. So it looks a bit nicer and better when you have something like this, because you could actually load the page on a mobile phone and then scroll the table and find whatever column you might need. Okay, so now that we have those two things, we might want to add some pagination to our table. So with Bootstrap, this is actually fairly easy because Bootstrap has a component of pagination which we are actually going to be using right now. So if we take a look at our code editor, I've already prepared the code right here. I'm just going to indent it a bit so it's a bit more readable. And here we go. So basically this piece of code right here is what Bootstrap offers by default. And as you can see, I wrapped it in my own custom pagination controller because I want to be able to reuse this piece of code later on with the same styling. And since I want the pagination to be on the right side, I want to make sure that it doesn't mess up the layout after we put pull right to that. So I've also created some basic code for this pagination, and what it basically does, it just targets the Bootstrap default values so we get a nice and clean looking pagination. So if we refresh the page, we have our own custom pagination right here, as you can see. So in this video, we've learned how easy it actually is to apply various styles to our tables and how to make the table responsive, as well as how to add a simple pagination component to our table. Now, in our next video, what we are actually going to be doing is we are going to learn how to use what is called advanced tables that are powered with JavaScript and where you could do a lot of interesting stuff. So I will see you guys soon, and thank you for watching. And welcome back, guys, to our last video in the section 3 about Bootstrap tables, where we will be talking about advanced tables, or in this case, how to use JavaScript powered tables and Bootstrap together. More specifically, we will be using the widely most popular jQuery plugin, which is called DataTables.js, and what we will learn today is how to actually use it, how to apply it to our own table, and how to customize some of the options that we might want to customize in order to get the look and feel that we need. So, like I said, the jQuery plugin is available over at datatables.net, and as you can see, it's a jQuery plugin. And what it allows us to do is actually to transform any table, any HTML table that we have, into this really powerful tool that allows you to sort by any of the columns we want. Ajax pagination has some stuff like counters. You can limit how many rows show in a particular table. You can search for something like a name or something similar. And this, of course, works very good with Bootstrap and allows you to not only transform HTML tables, but to use external sources like JSON, PHP, MySQL data, or whatever you need and want. It also has a lot of extensions that are available, like autofill, fixed headers, responsive tables, and stuff like that. But what we will actually be doing is we will be downloading it like this, and you can now customize some of the things that you might need with this. So for now, we have our own version of jQuery, and we will actually be using the Bootstrap styling. So again, you can leave this by default. You don't need any plugins. For now, you want to get the minified version and the single files. And of course, you can serve it over a CDN network, or you can download the files like this, basically. So after you download the files, what you will actually get is something like I have right here. So I've created a new folder called DataTables, and inside I've put everything that I've just downloaded. So the core datatable plugin, the core datatable CSS, then the Bootstrap plugin that we need for it, both JavaScript and CSS, and what we actually want to do is include the font awesome integration because we are already using it, and the main place that we will use it is for these little sorter icons, because by default, believe it or not, these are PNGs, which we absolutely don't need. So we've left off with our table right here. And what I want to do is I just want to include the necessary CSS for data tables. So the CSS components are, like I said, we first include the core datatable CSS, then the font awesome extension for it, and then the Bootstrap extension for it. The same goes for JavaScript, but this time we only need the core datatables JavaScript and the Bootstrap extension. Now, the reason why we're using the Bootstrap extension is because by default, datatables don't exactly play nice with Bootstrap or don't use Bootstrap components, as you can see right here. But if you, for example, take a look at this example, you will actually see that it's using the Bootstrap pagination, it's using the form control elements, and it's using, by default, the glyph icon set. So after we've integrated this into our table, into our page, we might want to clean up our table a bit. So we don't need table bordered because by default, we will get that with data tables. And we absolutely want to define an ID. Sorry, we want to first remove the table responsive div like this. Let's indent this then a bit. Here we go. And we want to give this table an ID because in case we have multiple tables on the same page, we might want to reference it specially. So let's call this authors table like this. And now what we actually need in order to transform this regular table into a data tables powered table is copy some init JavaScript code, which can of course be found if you take a look at any of the examples or the documentation or the API for JavaScript. Again, this looks fairly similar when we have it here, and what I'm going to show you is going to be a lot more complex, but we'll go through it step by step. So I will just copy and paste this piece of JavaScript code right here. I'm going to indent it a bit like this. I've purposely commented this out because we'll get to it later. But for now, as you can see, we are calling the DataTables plugin on our authors table. We are defining a default of 8 rows per page, and we just said that we want to order ascending by the first table, and keep this in mind, this plugin counts from 0. So basically this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we want this table to be sorted by the first name ascending. And then we've basically defined some language parameters, and you'll see where these come in play later on. For now, we can just comment this out. And now in this columns array, the only thing we are defining is how each column will actually behave. So there are multiple, of course, parameters that you could configure, and you can go through all of these parameters in the API and manual section of the DataTables website, but we will be using searchable and orderable in our example. And what this basically does, if searchable is false, then you won't be able to search data in this column. If orderable is true, then you will actually be able to sort it ascending or descending. So since we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, we've defined the data, the options for each of those. And now if we take a look at our page, basically for now, this is how it looks. As you can see, we have some icons up top. We can see that it's sorted by the first name of the user. We have pagination, which is what it is at the moment. It's not very pretty, but we can change that if we need to. Now, if I click to sort by email, you'll see that it's actually being sorted, and by status and by name and surname and everything else. If we search for a name like Veda, you'll see it narrowing down the results. And again, since we defined that we don't want this to be orderable, you can't actually order by this column, which is the JavaScript code here. Now, what we want to do is we want to modify this table a bit. Basically, I want to remove this, and I want to give this whole area a bit of better look and feel. Now, this is where DOM comes into play. DOM is actually another customization option that you can use with DataTables. And it's a bit weird because you're actually defining where something is placed in the table. So basically, it has its own kind of structure and language, which you could definitely go learn more about at the DataTables website. But the gist of it is we want to make a table header div, and inside of that, we want to have the filtering options right here. Then we will have the table itself, and then we'll have the table footer, which is basically the pagination and this. So now after we refresh the page, we will see that our table looks a bit different. And that's because we've actually told the DataTables plugin to create a new div that is actually called table header. And then we added filters to it, like search, and then the rest goes as it follows. So if we again search for something, you will see that it works and it looks good. It looks better than what we had. Now again, this is a very, very powerful plugin, and there are numerous ways that you could customize this and numerous extensions that you can find around the internet. And most importantly, you can integrate this with any type of server-side technology that you want. It even has some sample code and scripts that you can use. And it's basically what we use and what all professional developers in most cases use to power their tables, especially when you have, I don't know, a few thousand results and you want to quickly order or search or do something else. So again, I've tried to give you the basics of how DataTables work. Of course, to get you started, you don't need this much code. The only basically code you need is, if we take a look at this example right here, would be a few lines of code like example.datatable, and it will automatically transform your table. What I've shown you is a bit more advanced and allows you to customize not only the table look and feel, but how the data is being manipulated, which, from what I know and from the websites that I've built, you will actually need to do this. Okay, now that we've learned everything that there is to know about the Bootstrap tables, we can move on to a new section, which is going to be focused on working with the Bootstrap JavaScript side. So the next section is working with Bootstrap modals, and I will see you then. Goodbye, and thank you for watching again. Hi, and welcome to the fourth section of this video course. In the previous section, we've learned how to use tables in our application and use a third-party plugin called DataTables to make our tables more interactive. In this section, we will cover Bootstrap plugins in depth, including customizing the look and feel of them. We will also make our application more responsive and learn a few hacks and tips along the way. Okay guys, we are back with a new video called Working with Bootstrap JS Plugins, where we will take a look at how to use some of the most popular Bootstrap JS plugins like modals, popovers, tooltips, and dropdowns, how to hack the Bootstrap JS plugins to do more than they are supposed to do, and how to customize the look and feel of the Bootstrap plugins. So if you remember, in our last section, we've played around with tables and we've set up this authors table where we have a nice list of all the PACKT publishing authors, and we can sort them by name, surname, we can search for users and similar. Now, we are already using Bootstrap JS plugin right here, and you can see it in action if you click under Actions. So basically this is a Bootstrap drop-down plugin, and all you have to do to basically enable the plugin is add data toggle drop-down to it, and you need to follow it up by an element with the class of a drop-down menu. Now this can be unordered list like we have, or it could be a div element and have a completely different structure. Now that we are taking a look at this menu, you can see that I have already added a details list item, and I have prepared it so that we can use Bootstrap modals. Now all we have to do if we want to enable Bootstrap modals is set a data toggle of modal and the data target of whatever we want to call the div of our modal window. Now I'm calling it Ajax modal just because we are going to use this same div later on. But for now, what we need to add if we want this modal to show, because right now it's not going to do anything, we actually need to add the necessary HTML. Again, I have prepared it just to save time, and we are going to put it at the end of our page. And basically, this is the HTML structure that you need for the Bootstrap modals. Now, of course, as you can see, we have our div with the class of modal and the ID of Ajax modal, and inside we have modal header, modal body, and modal footer. Now, I've just added some content here just so we can see how it looks, but of course what we want to do in the future is show user details when we click on this. So for now, you see that it looks good. It has the default Bootstrap styling. We haven't actually applied any styling here, so everything that you see is actually what Bootstrap offers. Now, to make it a bit more interesting, we are just going to add a bit of our own CSS right here, and what we are actually doing is we are targeting different values of the modal. So we're just going to make the modal look a bit like our CMS. And let's see how this looks. So as you can see, it looks a bit better. It's more squarish than rounded, which is good because our whole CMS has that theme. And that's basically it. You can run Bootstrap modals in just 3 steps. Now, a lot of the times, you might need to pull this information from a database. So it wouldn't make sense to have these HTML blocks for every user in this table. And in this case, we need to do some hacking around the Bootstrap modals, because by default there is no option to load content dynamically. So for that purpose, I've added a new folder called modals and usermodal.php. So basically, at the moment, I'm just taking the user ID that is posted to this PHP file and displaying it here, just so you guys know that we are actually doing something with that modal. Of course, you can pull in data from the database and do all sorts of fun stuff. So we actually need to adopt our script a bit to do that. So I've prepared the code. Of course, the first thing we need to actually do is we can remove all of this because we are actually going to populate it via an Ajax form. So we'll have just this. And then, of course, we need a new JavaScript function. So we're going to call this one show user modal. And you can see that we are using the onClick event from jQuery on every class that has show user modal. And what we'll be doing is we'll be taking the data ID property of that user and posting it to the usersmodal.php file, where we will get some data back. And after we get the data back, we will basically populate the modal with that content. So what we actually need to do in order to make that happen is change this from this to something like, let's say, 101 and class show user modal. Now, of course, if we run this, you'll actually see that we are getting the user ID right here. And one important thing to notice, once we close it, the modal hides, but we still have a problem because all of this content is laying in the HTML and we don't need it. So what we want to make sure that we do is that we actually clean up the modal after it closes. So what we are going to do is we are going to use modal event called hidden BS modal. So we are going to say on hidden BS, just empty the Ajax modal, which means basically it will empty everything in modal dialog. So if we take a look now, we still get those details, but when we press close, it empties out. So now we can display another user and show his info instead of the first user. Now, another interesting plugins that we could use is popovers. So we can apply a simple popover right here. So all we have to do, let's say again that we want to get a bit more details when we click on my name about, let's say, my bio or something like that. So all we have to do is say data toggle pop over data title, let's say about veteran, and data content, hey guys, let's copy a bit more info about me from this page just to make it a bit more interesting. So let's do it like this. Yes. But of course, this time we actually have to write additional JavaScript to kind of trigger those popovers, because popovers in Bootstrap are opt-in only, which means they don't run by default. So what we need to add is this simple line of JavaScript code to trigger popovers. So if we now take a look, you'll see that this is a link, and if we click on it, we do get more information about me, and it looks very, very cool. Now, again, you might ask, hey, what if I need to display HTML here, or maybe the content is too long? Again, we might need to hack around a bit. So what we are actually going to do to remove the data content piece from here, and we are going to add a new div with a class of hidden, which is a default Bootstrap helper class that basically hides elements by default when applying this class. And we are going to add it an ID of, let's say, user1, and we're just gonna comment this out, and we are going to this time put HTML content. So we'll use the same text as we did before, but this time let's add a bit of HTML to it. So let's say we want this and this, like this, and I don't know, maybe let's add one BR element here. Okay, so now what we are trying to do is, when clicking on this popover element, we want to show the content of this div. To do that, all we again have to do is basically write a few simple lines of JavaScript. Excuse me. All we have to do is write a simple line of JavaScript that again targets popovers, but this time we're going to call them Ajax popover. We're going to say that HTML is true. We are going to place them on top, and this is the interesting part. For the content of that template, we are going to return the value of the data popover content. So what we are going to define here, instead of data content, we're going to do something like this. So when a popover gets triggered, it will actually pull in this content right here. Now to show you how it looks, okay, I forgot to basically rename the variable, but basically this is now it. This should be working. So sorry for that, but basically I forgot to remove or change the data toggle attribute from popover to Ajax popover, which we defined in our JavaScript file to load a specific type of popover with that class. So now that we have it working, one last thing that we can check out, which is pretty similar to popovers, which is basically tooltips. Now, tooltips are again dead simple to use, and all we basically have to do is add a bit of HTML and JavaScript. So to show that off, let's just add, let's say, I don't know, a span element here on my surname, and let's add data toggle tooltip, data. Now you could use data title or just the title, so we're just going to copy this in and say Zindrich is awesome. And of course, since this again is opt-in functionality, we need to once again write a single line of JavaScript to trigger these simple tooltips. So we're going to do this, and we're going to save. We need a semicolon here, and if we run it, you will see we have our tooltip. So this would conclude the Bootstrap JavaScript section right here. Now, there are a couple of other Bootstrap JS plugins like Carousel or ScrollSpy or Tabs, but these are also fairly simple to use and are not as interesting as the ones that we showed in terms of building complex layout and scenarios. So this should do it for this video, and we will be moving on to our next video, which is called Most Popular Third-Party JavaScript Plugins. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching. Hello guys, and welcome to a new video called Most Popular Third-Party JavaScript Plugins, where we will take a look at how to use some of the most popular and Bootstrap-friendly third-party JavaScript plugins, how to customize them, and how to basically implement them in your project in a useful and meaningful way. So we left off last time by taking a look at some of the integrated or built-in Bootstrap plugins like modals, like popovers and similars. So what we are going to be taking a look today is something a bit different. So the list of plugins is basically chosen by me. And these are some of the plugins that I use on a daily basis in most of my projects. And basically they help me get the job done in a very nice and efficient way. Of course, these are not absolutely the best plugins. Maybe there are better, maybe there aren't. This is my list of the plugins that I use, that I know that they work at what they're supposed to do. So let's check out a few of the plugins that I use. Now, one of the plugins that I use the most in Forms is actually a plugin called Chosen. Now, what this plugin actually does, it turns regular drop-downs into something that is more cool looking and more useful like this. Basically, I can, for example, search for a country instead of having to go through a select list. Or if I have multiple selects, I can basically add them as tags or even groups and stuff like that. So basically, to get us started with integrating Chosen, of course, we have to first download it, which I've already done. and I added it to our project in the folder JS chosen. Now it's always good to have third-party JavaScript plugins in their own folders because you don't want to mix up any code or anything similar. So I've built a simple page called add author, which basically for now looks like this, right? It has a language or a country selector. It has date of birth, first name, last name, email, bio. Now, what we want to actually do, and let's just first change the language to country, just so we are all clear on what this is. Great. So what we want to do is, after we have loaded chosen into our page, and keep in mind, I've loaded all the plugins that we are going to use in the same place. But for now, we need to load chosen CSS and, of course, the chosen JS. After we've done that, all we need to do is basically add one little line of JavaScript that basically will trigger chosen whenever it sees a class of chosen select. Now, this disable search threshold is set to 5 because you don't want your list item to be searched if there's like 5 or 10 items. You want it to be searched after like, I don't know, 10 items or more because you don't need it unless it's a bigger list. So let's see what basically this will do to our select element. So as you can see, it's already transformed the way it looks and feels, and it's added this little search box so I can basically search for whatever I want right here. So this is a very cool and user-friendly way of like collecting data from select boxes, and it also looks really, really nice, especially, and this is the trick, when we add a bit of our own styling. Now, I have to admit, chosen is a bit difficult. I'll just add this to our CSS folder at the bottom, right here. So you might take a look at this CSS and you might think it's a bit weird, and it actually is. But what we are doing is we are targeting all the different chosen elements, again, generated by the chosen JavaScript file, and we are making some adjustments to make it more like our design. So what we've done is we've actually replaced the default icon set with font awesome to be used with chosen, and we've set some colors and borders and paddings. So if we take a look at how it looks now, you'll see that all our fields look the same, but this is actually a really nice looking select list. Now, again, you can do a lot of different things like transform multiple selects or stuff like that, but for now we are going to leave it at this. And we are going to take another look at another plugin which is going to be about form validation. So I've been using this plugin which is called pretty straightforward. It's just formvalidation.io, and again it has a Bootstrap plugin for it which you can download and use. So as you can see, it has like different frameworks, different languages. You can use it with Bootstrap, Foundation, or whatever framework you are using. And basically, from what I've seen, this seemed to be the best plugin out there because it just has a lot of different validation options and offers a lot of like options and examples to get you basically started. So as you can see, it has a really good list of like integration guides and how to do some things. And best of all, it's really compatible with any of the plugins that we are about to talk about. So it works with Chosen, it works with date pickers and stuff like that. So basically I've also downloaded the form validation plugin and I've added it to the validation folder inside JavaScript and all the files that we need. Of course, I've also included it right here just so we can see how it looks. Now, to enable it, of course, you need to write JavaScript. So to make it run, we will check for a class of validate, and we will trigger the plugin with some default values. So for example, we want the container to be a tooltip. So there are multiple types of containers that you can choose from, and I chose tooltips because they are the least obtrusive and still look good. Also, there are different types of triggers. So a trigger means when does the form validation occur. And basically, blur means whenever the user finishes with one field and continues with the other. And a nice little option right here is feedback icons, which I just set to font awesome because we already have it. After that, I just wanted to remove the success icons. So by default, this form will put a really nice looking success icon after a field has been correctly entered, but I don't think that's necessary for the user to know, so I just wanted to be removed like this. Now what we need to do is we need to, of course, add this class to our form element right here, and after that, if we want to make something, make a specific field, for example, required, we just need to add data fv not empty true. Also, when looking at these validators, you can set them via JavaScript. For example, let's say we want a date. You can set it via JavaScript, or you can set it, for example, this is how you would set it via JavaScript, or you can set it by using the data attributes, as you can see right here. Now, another cool thing about this plugin is it will basically allow you to use the default HTML input types, for example, email, text area, date, digits, and stuff like that. So by default, this will be required, but also the validation will be done on email. So if we take a look at our form right here and press add, you will actually see the popovers in action. If we refresh, you can see how the blur works. So if I just hit tab, the validation will occur after I hit tab. Or here, if I type in the wrong email after I hit tab, you will notice that this is actually now invalid. And as you can see, this is how the validation errors look, which is basically pretty cool, non-obtrusive way of showing the user what is actually going on in their form. Now, another cool plugin that I use in conjunction with form validation is jQuery Form, which basically allows you to post forms via Ajax seamlessly without basically any effort. And the best thing is it works really good with the form validation plugin. So I've also created a little snippet of JavaScript that will both validate and submit using Ajax, and I call that validate and submit. So this portion of the code will actually be the same as this one above, but right here on success form, we are actually using jQuery form to process the form. So the best thing about jQuery form is basically it will take all the fields in the form and post them to whatever the URL you specified this. In our example, we are actually using the URL that is provided right in it within our form action value. So I'm not going to demo this because it would require some kind of form handling, but you could basically pass this on to any PHP or like AJ or ASAP or Node or whatever you want. And it will simply work just by changing the class to validate and submit. Okay, now that we have our form validation, we can maybe take another look at another form element, which is the Bootstrap date picker. Now, this is a really common plugin that you will see on websites. I chose this one because it has both a date picker and a time picker, and you can use them all at once, or you can use just the time picker or just the date picker. And again, the best thing is I can customize it to look and feel however I want and to work with some of the other different Bootstrap plugins that we have, like again, form validation or Font Awesome. So to enable that, all we actually need to do is write a few lines of JavaScript. So as you can see, I'm calling a date time picker plugin on every date picker class, and I'm using my own format. Now, since I specified a format without any time, this will actually only use the date picker without the time picker. I also set the current date to current, and I just specified a bunch of icons so that they are replaced with our own Font Awesome icon library. Now, before we move on, of course, I included all the necessary JavaScript and CSS files in our page, but I've also added moment.min library, which is basically a helper library for using and handling dates in JavaScript. This is really cool, and if you've never heard of it, trust me, it will make your life easier as a front-end developer. You'll be able to do a lot of cool stuff, like just by providing a date, you'll be able to set fancy dates like in a day or an hour ago and something similar. And you have to use it with Bootstrap 3 date picker. So after we've included our library, we just need to add the date picker to any element that we actually want. So if we take a look at how this looks, you will see that within like 2 minutes of work, we have a fully functional date picker, and we can choose whatever the time we want. Okay, now we've wrapped up a bunch of different form plugins, so we can move on up to our last plugin. Let me just close these tabs out, which is basically going to be about modals. Now, you might think, okay, we already are using Bootstrap modals, but this is a fairly different plugin, and it's intended to be almost a replacement for JavaScript alerts. So basically, it will have a fancy version of alerts, and we can use it in a very, very cool way in conjunction with Bootstrap. Now, one of the ways that you would use it is basically to, for example, confirm an action. And in our case, we might want to confirm a delete action instead of just deleting a user immediately. So again, we need to include a plugin, which I did right here. And for example, let's add to our table, let us add a data ID to the delete list item of, let's say, 42, and let's add a class of confirm user delete. And of course, we need to add a bunch of JavaScript to enable the bootbox.js. Now, as you can see, again, I'm using a jQuery onClick function just to get the value, the ID of the user that we want to delete, and then I'm triggering a bootbox dialog. And I'm setting some default things like message, title, and the most important thing is I'm defining all the buttons. Now I've defined the danger button with a label of cancel and button cancel, and the success button of the label continue, but this time this button has a callback, which means whenever somebody presses the continue button, we want to actually trigger an AJAX request to something that will actually delete the backend, the user from the backend, and basically return something right here. Now we can, for example, delete it from the user table and, for example, slide up the row or something similar, or refresh the page or something similar. Now, let's see how this looks in action. If we press delete, we get a confirmation action, and this is everything we basically need to do to make that happen. Now, if we press cancel, nothing will happen, but if we press continue, it will actually make that AJAX request, which of course is up to you to build. Now, we've covered a lot of different plugins, and I don't have a lot of time to cover all of them. Of course, I use more of them, but I just want to highlight one last plugin, which is unfortunately a paid plugin, but is actually a rich text editor. And the reason why I'm telling you this, again, I'm not sponsored by the guys or anything, it's because it's simply really, really good in terms of text editors. So I've tried the C-Key editor, I've tried the many editors on the internet, but this editor is simply really lightweight, it works really, really great, and it has a lot of functionality that you would need in a rich text editor. So just please check it out. If you think it's cool, use it. If not, then some other time. So this should wrap up our second video in this section. And before we leave, I just want to mention that we've now included a hefty amount of both CSS and JavaScript at our page. When you are doing this in production, please, for performance sake, minify and group all these requests into one to make your website load faster. So, to conclude, next video will be about making our app more responsive and providing a better user experience. So thank you, and I will see you soon. Hello guys, and welcome back to a new video called Making Our App More Responsive, where we'll take a look at how to use Bootstrap for responsive design, how to write our own custom CSS code to support responsive design, and how to optimize the responsive experience for our users. Now, before we dive into our CMS and concrete code examples, I just wanted to talk a bit about what Bootstrap will do for you in terms of responsive design and what it won't do. So Bootstrap is a great framework, and it comes with a lot of stuff out of the box to help you get started quickly, both in terms of design overall and responsive design. But if you are using custom designs, custom elements, custom code, you have to understand that by default, Bootstrap will not be able to provide you with a good responsive experience. you will still have to use a lot of your own CSS code to make sure that responsive experience is really great on all devices. You will have to test on real devices to make sure that that works, and you'll have to know what works on different screen sizes. So for example, it's not the same if a user is visiting on a mobile phone where he has 480 pixels of width, and on a desktop computer where he might have, let's say, 1920 pixels of space. There just simply isn't enough room to display, for example, everything that you might want. So you'll have to optimize both on the design side and on the content side. Now, if we take a look at our login page and we use the built-in web developer tools from Firefox and fire up the responsive design view, you'll see that currently this login page really sucks on mobile phone. So I've done this on purpose, and the reason for this is we are using a set width. Now, this is a really specific example where, for example, setting the max width won't help because we are using this transform CSS rule to make sure that everything is positioned 50% from the top and from the left. So we will have to do additional tweaking. So for example, I use Firebug to quickly test everything that I do in terms of responsive design. So for example, if we just change this to 320 and set this to be 100%, you'll see that this looks much better. So we can literally take this class and open up our CSS file, and at the bottom you will see the holy grail of responsive design, which are these media queries. So I've defined some for laptops, large tablets, small tablets, and mobile phones. So here we'll paste in our class and basically override the CSS that we have for desktop only for devices that are max width 480 pixels. So this means 480 and below. So we will say something width 100% and max width will be set to 320. Again, we're using this combination specifically because if you remember, we have this transform CSS rule right here that basically centers it and then requires those two values to be set. So if we refresh the page, you will see that our page looks a bit better now. But still, we need to make this a bit smaller. It doesn't make sense to take up this amount of space on a user's phone, for example. So we will just, for example, take this H2 element and again override the code by using media queries and doing something like, let's say, 34 times 100, which is 51. So we can, let's see how this basically will look. Now that is a bit better. And just to save up on space, we'll kill the margin bottom on this H1 element. Now I order my rewrites as they come, which means I will always be able to find them. So for example, I've just written all the rewrites for the login page right here, and I'm going to continue with some other CSS code, and I'll always be able to find it and reference it. Now if we move on to our dashboard page, you will see that we are actually using Bootstrap responsive grid here. So we've set on desktop this to be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and then we are using halves right here. So if we take a look at how this looks, for example, on a mobile phone, you'll see that it goes to 100%. But on a tablet size, it will be divided into 2x2 columns. So if we want, for example, even on mobile phones, for this to be 50% or 2 by 2, we can actually do that by using Bootstrap. So for example, just by providing a new class of call XS6 on this right here, we will be able to do that. And Bootstrap will do its thing, and you will have the correct code right here, but still we have a design issue. This is our own design issue because we've made this icon really, really big. So we can either trim the icon size down and see what it works best, but I can see that we're not going to be able to do that. So what we can simply do is, for example, and this is a very popular method of responsive design, we can actually hide it. Again, this is very popular, but it is not something that you want to be using often. Yes, you want to hide unnecessary things from users on mobile phones, but you don't want to destroy your complete layout and your design just to, for example, save up on space. We can also trim down the padding right here so we can make it a bit better right here in Firebug, for example, because we don't need as much space as we have here. So this looks a bit better, and now the user has the complete overview of everything that they need to have once they basically log in and see the dashboard. Now, for example, our forms look really, really good in responsive design because there isn't much to it. The only thing we could do here is, for example, remove the unnecessary margin right here to make a bit more space. So again, all we are going to do is just overwrite what we have already done above and say something like this. And now if we take a look, this margin will be removed, and what we could do is we could even trim down the height of each of the elements right here to fit as much as content as we want on this screen. So it looks a bit better right now. Again, one of the scenarios where we can use Bootstrap is, for example, tables. So as you can see, this website right now won't look very good because it's literally breaking our layout, as you can see. So the way Bootstrap can assist us right here is just by adding a little div with table responsive right here and closing it out at the end of our table. Be sure to comment this out like this. And now if we take a look at our page, you'll see that actually nothing is broken. Our page is in the container, but our table is basically overflow Y, which means you can scroll it left and right like this and see additional columns that you might want to see. But by default, this is a much better experience by using Bootstrap. And again, you can optimize this experience a bit more by trimming down the padding, font sizes, and maybe turning off unnecessary columns. So, of course, we're using the DataTables plugin, so they do, for example, have a responsive design view, and you can set it via JavaScript. Now, when we are talking about JavaScript, a lot of the times you might have, for example, something specific set with JavaScript. For example, some widths, or maybe you need to trigger a completely different layout, or maybe you want to load something different using JavaScript. You might want to check inquire.js because it basically allows you to do what you would do with CSS and what we've just did in CSS by defining a custom media query and targeting specific classes and things like that. So this will allow you to do that with JavaScript, and you'll be able to, for example, turn off some JavaScript or recalculate some sizes or whatever you need. So basically it's the same principle. You again target a specific media query and a specific width of the device, and you have these great helper classes like match, unmatch, where you can control the layout. So I've briefly introduced you to responsive design, and as you can see, it's basically a lot of manual rewriting of code and a lot of testing of the code to see how it works and why it works. So to finish it off, I'm just going to, for example, show you a website that we've recently been working on. And as you can see, this is a pretty big and for example, complex website, and it has a lot of content and a lot of different things. And for example, if we take a look at this website in like a responsive view, you will see that the complete layout and everything is still actually the same. So we've managed to completely retain the content and the functionality of the website as it was on desktop and make sense on mobile without any problems. And it took a lot of testing, a lot of design, like for example these little details where you see on desktop, for example, you have a lot of these users on one page, and then for example when you go on a mobile size, you don't see as many. You see this kind of scroller right here, so you can move the content left and right. So these are like some of the things that you need to work with your designer, but all in all, responsive design will require a lot of your time and a lot of your coding hours. This is it for this section. We have covered quite a few topics in this section, and I hope you found it interesting. The plugins are really good, and you should use them in your day-to-day projects to make your life easier. So I think we can wrap up this video and move on to our next section, which is going to be about Bootstrap 4. And our first video is going to be the difference between Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4. So thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. In the previous section, we covered the use of different JS plugins to make our website a joy to use. In this section, we will learn all about the newly introduced version of Bootstrap, which is version 4, and we will learn how to migrate our existing application to it. Hello guys, and welcome to the last section in our course, which is going to be all about Bootstrap 4. Today we have a new video called Difference between Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4. And we'll take a look at what is new in Bootstrap 4, what are some of the key differences between Bootstrap 3 and 4, and how to download and use Bootstrap 4 to test your current websites or applications. So we can navigate to the official Bootstrap website over at getbootstrap.com, and you will see this big blue banner at the top saying Bootstrap 4 is coming. So you can just click on it. It will open a blog post which will basically go into some details about some of the changes. But for now, you just have to click on this big image and you will be taken to the V4 alpha version of the Bootstrap. Now, as you can see, Bootstrap 4 is in alpha.2. So keep in mind, since this is alpha, some of the things that we are reviewing right now might actually change. But if we click under documentation and then scroll down to migration, we get a list of all the changes that occurred in Bootstrap 4. Now, some of the most important stuff is listed right here, and we will cover some of them. So for example, we can start off by, in Bootstrap 4, they have dropped support for IE 8 and some iOS and Android versions. So if you're supporting IE 8, you will have to find a way to work around some of the things that Bootstrap did for you. They have also switched from LESS to SAS or SCSS, if you want to call it. They are using REMS as the primary CSS unit, both in terms of typography and other size units. And they have added new grid tier for Bootstrap 4 just to target mobile devices, which is really cool. So we'll be able to use that in the updated Bootstrap 4 version. Now they have dropped some stuff, but we're not using it. I haven't used them ever, so I don't think that's important. Another cool feature that they finally did is they dropped support for glyph icons images, and you can now use a custom font library like Font Awesome or Glyph Icons font. Now, if we go down below, you will see that they are also using a new, let's say, normalized CSS that is called Reboot, and it basically builds on the version of normalize. Now, this is going to take care of some of the browser differences, but it's nothing that you should be concerned about. Now, one thing that we might need to change a lot in our app is actually replacing image responsive to image fluid. The same goes for tables, because, for example, you no longer need to wrap table into a div with table responsive. From now on, you'll be able to put it directly on the table. They've also changed the way that they target specific selectors inside of tables, so we might need to revise that. They've also renamed some classes for forms, as you can see here. They've also changed horizontal forms a lot, and there are numerous other changes that you can see right here, and additions like panels and cards. So you can go ahead and take a deeper look at all the changes that have occurred right here, or I found this useful converter that basically allows you to input your Bootstrap 3 HTML and convert it to Bootstrap 4. It's done by Bootply, and I'll share the link in the description of this video. Now, I won't be using this converter, but this is a really convenient table of all the changes. So for example, you can see that image responsive has changed to image fluid. Selecting a list item from the nav bar is actually now a class instead of doing it like this. The same goes here. And the complete list, of course, is here and will be updated for now. Now, to get started with using Bootstrap 4, if you want to edit the SAS files, you will have to download the complete source and run some additional setup right here. But we'll just click on this button, and once we've downloaded that, we will get actually something like this. And in the dist folder, we will just pick up the bootstrap min.css and bootstrap min.js and replace them into our working folder to get us started with Bootstrap 4, and then we will see in a real life example what works and what doesn't work and why it doesn't work. So to finish off this video, I just wanted to repeat that, again, all of this is in alpha and some things might change, so keep that in mind as we move forward, and I will see you in our next video called Migrating Our App to Bootstrap 4. Thank you for watching. Hello guys, and welcome back to a new video called Migrating Our App to Bootstrap 4. where we'll take a look at how to switch and transform our app from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4, how to change the HTML and CSS that we need based on the changelog from Bootstrap 4, and basically how to run our app on Bootstrap 4 at this moment. So before we begin, I just want to explain that, of course, this will vary from app to app. For example, we have a lot of custom code that interacts with Bootstrap, so in some way, on some things we are pretty safe, but for example, some of the stuff that use core Bootstrap functionality we need to change, because as we saw, things have changed in some cases. Now, as you can see, I've loaded up PACKT CMS website right here. The only thing that we did is we replaced the bootstrap min.css with the alpha version of CSS, and of course with the alpha version of JavaScript. So first thing we see if we open up our Firebug is we are getting an error, and it has something to do with popovers. And conveniently, Bootstrap is giving us a message saying that it needs a third-party library. So we are going to include this library right here in order for us to run tooltips, popovers, and similar. So this is something that I didn't know as well, but just include the tether.min library that you download from this website if you guys want to have popovers and tooltips like we do. Now, if we refresh the website, we will see that the error is actually gone. So if we take a look at what is actually going on here, we'll see that things look pretty similar to what we have. Of course, this is because for some stuff, actually for the majority of stuff, we are using our own custom code, except as you can see, this is completely broken. And the reason why it's broken is that there is no help block anymore. Form control feedback doesn't have position absolute anymore, and some other stuff. So we need to actually change this. Now we are going to make this change, but keep in mind in future this will probably be fixed in the form validation plugin that we are actually using. As of now, of course, we need to fix this basically manually. Now the same thing will happen on authors, where if we try to add something, you will see this looking completely wrong right here. So as you can see, we need to make this position absolute. We need to make sure that this form group is actually position relative, and we need to make sure that somebody can actually view this because it's really, really small. So I've already prepared some of the CSS that we need. Basically, I'm just going to copy and paste it in our form box area. So let's see what we have here. So we will first just paste in the form group, and then let's say the form help block, where on form group we've said, hey, we need this position relative, and on help block we want this to be displayed as a block. We set some font size, margin, and font color that we need. Now, of course, this also isn't set to position absolute anymore, so we need to basically set that right. Now, if we take a look at, for example, the odd author page, we'll see that things actually look a bit better right now. Or if we see, for example, on the login page, you will see that it is now completely working. Now, one thing that you might notice is in Bootstrap 3, we had this text in a tooltip, and that is, the reason for that is right now the current validation plugin that we are using is not actually very friendly in terms of tooltips. So we do get a JavaScript error. Now you have to understand that it will take time for plugins, third-party plugins, to adjust and make the necessary changes to support Bootstrap or anything else that we might have here. So you won't be able to just download Bootstrap 4 and everything will work. It will take, again, some time for these plugins that we use, like form validation, DataTables, date pickers, to adjust their code to support Bootstrap 4. So for now, we'll just have to live with the solution that we have right here. And the same goes for the add authors page, where at least we have it working correctly. Now, as you can see, again, right here, we have a problem with our date picker plugin, which basically doesn't have any of the styling that it did before, which again is due to the fact that this is very specific plugin for Bootstrap that relies heavily on the CSS that is provided from Bootstrap. So these plugins will get updated and things will of course work normally. So we can move on to our dashboard page, where I can see that we have one issue right here. So basically, as you can see, we have this little indicator of a drop down 2 times. This is our own indicator right here, and this is something at the bottom that Bootstrap has added. So this is something new in Bootstrap 4. In Bootstrap 3, you had to manually define this little icon. So as we can see, after the drop-down toggle, it's actually displaying this little icon right here. So we need to remove that. And of course, our menu is completely wrecked and it doesn't look very good. And this is because, again, Bootstrap has changed the way that you create drop-down menus. As you can see from the CSS, the only CSS that gets applied is our own. So what we need to actually do here, and again, I have prepared some of this code, which is basically, let's just close some stuff out we don't need. Great. So we need to change first the HTML of that drop down, and then we need to change the CSS. So basically we need to change this, and I'll just copy and paste the new code below to this. So let's together take a look at what are the changes. Okay, basically we have a drop down div like here. We have the button that is virtually the same, and now we get to this part right here. So as you can see, you no longer need an ordered list because you're not required to have list items here. So basically we can change this to a div, and we need to add a class of drop-down item to each of our ref or anchor elements. So if we delete this block right here, and if we take a look at how it looks now, you'll see that it does have some styling that has appeared from Bootstrap right here. So the only thing that we actually need to do is replace our own CSS, which can be found right here. So we need to replace basically all of these values with some of the new stuff that we have. So we can just copy and paste the code over. And as you can see, we're actually just targeting different elements and having the same CSS code. Plus, I've decided to remove this little icon right here in favor of the Font Awesome icon, because I'm going to be using that one. So I've decided to set display none to drop down toggle after. And if we now take a look to see how this looks, you will see that we basically get the same look and feel that we had before. And we again had to change some code, but nothing drastic. Now we can move on to the page which requires the most amount of change, and which is basically the authors page. So as you can see, we have a couple of things that are broken here. For example, this popover text, as you might remember, we're using the modified version of this popover. We called it Ajax popover, and we set that to be a class of hidden. So basically we said we don't want to display this by default, but hidden is removed in Bootstrap 4, so we kind of have to deal with it. Also, this menu is completely broken and pagination is broken as well. Now, a lot of this stuff, at least the pagination part, is due to the DataTables plugin that we use, and it hasn't been updated to support Bootstrap 4, so for this moment we'll just hack around it to make it happen. So the first thing we want to do, let's take care of this menu right here. So if we take a look at our code, you will see that we actually have the same problem as we did on our sidebar menu, which is we have the wrong code. So what we want to do is we want to put the modified code right here, which means we'll just replace this complete block with this piece of code which has the new drop-down item class on all menu items, and we need to kind of replace it everywhere, but for the sake, I will try to do it as quickly as possible. If not, I will do it later on to save some time right now. So we don't have a lot, so let's just complete this so we can move on. And again, we're not doing anything special here, but rather we're replacing a few classes and the way that we actually target those classes. So now if we refresh the page and take a look at what is going on, you will see that this list looks a bit better. But again, we have an additional icon right here for the drop-down that we don't need and we don't want. So now all we have to do is actually add some styling to it. So let's first find what we need, which is the button actions table right here. So we can replace all of these with our new code, which has drop-down item. And now we again need to kill off basically this additional button, which we will do by targeting this right here. So I've just selected the code from Firebug and we'll set it to display none. Again, we could probably set it just like this and then override all of our drop-down menus, but for now we will do it like this just so we know what are we doing. Great. So as you can see, we've fixed all those menus. Now we need to fix this. So this needs to be basically hidden. So we can add like a new section in our own CSS, which we'll call helpers, because in future you might have a lot of these. And we'll just add hidden as display none. So this should do the trick, and now we can actually see that our popover is working 100%. Now again, we do have an error right here. So if we take a look, the second time it will actually fire up an error. Now this is due to the way that we are using popovers, and we would need to again, make sure that the code for this work. The same goes for tooltips. So as you can see, we will get a tooltip error right here. I still haven't discovered what the actual problem is, but I will, and I will let you know, and you will get the fixed code. But for now, something is really strange with the JavaScript that Bootstrap has provided. Next, we can see that our pagination is broken right here. Now, this is again due to the third-party plugin that we are using called DataTables. Now, as you can see, the same as our validation plugin, this has a special adapter for Bootstrap. And as we can see, if we take a look at the code, it's actually only an unordered list with the class of pagination, LE, and an anchor. But in the new Bootstrap 4, we actually need to add a page item and a page link to all those elements. So again, we'll just hack around this at the moment, but DataTables will support this out of the box once Bootstrap 4 comes out. So we need to basically find in this minified version of the file, again, I'm using a minified version, but we'll quickly find it and fix it. So as you can see, we'll just replace this LE element with the LE of class of page item, and we'll use it to replace the anchor element again with the Bootstrap 4 required page link, which is basically this. And now if we take a look at our pagination, you will see that it actually looks like Bootstrap, and we would again need to style it according to our own liking, but for now we will let it be. So as you can see, we've managed to kind of quickly fix and get up and running with Bootstrap 4. We do have a lot of our own custom code, but we did need to fix some things. For example, another thing that we can update right here is the dashboard boxes, and we can use the new Bootstrap grid system, which basically now has a bit of a different layout. So the variables are triggered a bit differently. So I suggest you take a look at the new grid layout, and again, you will have to learn it the same way you learned it before. But at least this is not that big of a change from example how it was from Bootstrap 2 to Bootstrap 3. So this should do it for this video, and we'll move on to our new video called Using New Bootstrap 4 Components. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Hello everybody, we are back with a new video called Using New Bootstrap 4 Components, where we'll take a look at what are some of the brand new things in Bootstrap 4, how to use the new Bootstrap card component, and what are some of the various card component layouts. Now, before we move on, I would just like to state that based on the current documentation and everything that we know about Bootstrap, there aren't a lot of new things in terms of components or something exciting that you will be using. Most of the stuff that is actually done is in the background, if I might say. So for example, Bootstrap 4 will be much lighter in size, much more faster, more performant, both in terms of CSS and HTML as well as JavaScript. They have worked on the grid a lot, and we have the Flexbox, which will make a really good addition to the grid system. So all in all, this is a really good version of Bootstrap, but there isn't just so many new things as you would, for example, find in Bootstrap 3 or something similar. So that's why I would like to focus on cards, because believe it or not, from what I see, you can do a lot of things with it, a lot of interesting things that we'll take a look. So if you go to the documentation and then under components, you will see card, and you will immediately see that it replaced all the panels, wells, and thumbnails. So if we take a quick look, you will see that a simple card looks like this, and that there are many content options to choose from. But some more interesting things are happening below. So for example, you could use cards for a masonry layout, which is really, really interesting because there's no JavaScript involved. So let me just scroll down to it. If we get to card columns, here we go. Like it says, you could use a masonry style layout just by using cards in CSS, which is a really, really welcome feature, and I did not expect it to be here. So we'll try this out. There are some fancy options as well, like decks, which will always keep the size of the card the same no matter how much content you have, or even groups that is, for example, ideal for pricing tables or feature tables or something similar. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at our dashboard. So we see that it's a bit plain at the moment, so we'll start adding some cards. So for example, we might want to add a few recent courses in this mix. So if we want to do that, all we actually have to do is let's just set up a new row right here so that our new data is untagged. So since we are displaying courses, we might want to use column D4 for this one, just because there might be a lot of content and we do plan to use images. So let's copy the code I've prepared. So again, as you can see, I've just copy and pasted the card layout from Bootstrap 4. Let me just indent this a bit like this. Okay, so we have our cards div, then it's followed by the image of the course that we're gonna have. Then we have another wrapper, which basically Bootstrap says if there is no image, you should wrap it in card block just to make sure that everything is standardized and the sizing is taken care of. And then we have our content inside. Now, if we take a look at how this looks, you'll see that it's actually pretty good. Of course, you can make the image and the text a bit smaller because we don't want it that big. And now we see that Bootstrap is using ramps for font sizing right here and basically all other sizing as well. Now you can always check what the actual size of the font is in pixels just by going to Firebug Compute It, and you will see the font size in pixels. So we'll continue to use, for now, we'll continue to use pixels just so we don't confuse you, and let's just add a new section right here, and we're going to call it cards for now, cards, and let's just add the card title, and let's just put it to something like 18, and let's just add the line height of 27. So if you take a look, it looks a bit better. In this case, a bit smaller, so all we have to do is we can trim down, for example, the button that basically goes in here, and we can remove some of the padding that we have right here. So we're going to do something like, again, I'm just doing this to showcase the functionality, so let's just say font size 16, line height 24, let's see how it looks. The same, so let's do this and this, which will be better. Okay, so the button is now a bit smaller, and we can now add a few more recent courses to our dashboard and make it a bit more interesting. Now, of course, these are all random images. They will just reload randomly every time. You can use it for free on your own if you want. You just point to this lorempixel.com website and you get random images in the size that you basically want. So now that we got this little cool layout of the 4 recent courses, we might want to do something like a news feed of everything that is going on in the system. So we might want to add the masonry style layout that we just talked about, which is going to be perfect because sometimes we might not know the length of the content. For example, if it's a comment or something that a user entered, we might not know what the size of it is, and we want Bootstrap to automatically adjust that for us. So again, all we will do is we will actually add a new row and we will wrap it, call MD12 this time, and we'll put all our code. So this time we've wrapped each of the cards we've wrapped in card columns, which will make sure that we have that masonry layout. Now the card items here are different from one another in terms of the content, which means you can use any of the styles that you can see here, including the coloring options, images, inverted text, and everything that you might want. So this is really powerful stuff, and I see it actually being useful in some scenarios. So let's just reload to see what we have. So now, as you might have noticed, we have this really cool layout right below where everything is actually taken care of, and if we even go to a smaller size, you will see things adjusting on its own just with CSS, which is, I have to say, really, really amazing. So that's why I think cards will make a really good feature to know and understand in terms of Bootstrap 4. So now that we've kind of seen what is absolutely new in Bootstrap 4, you can always again take a look at the Bootstrap 4 documentation and see everything that has changed or that is new and being added new. So this should do it for this video, and we are almost done with this course. So our next video is going to be our last video, which is called Final Steps. And I will see you there. Thank you for watching. Hello everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our last video in our Mastering Bootstrap course. This video is called Final Steps, and we'll just take a look at the Bootstrap 4 release date and some more information about that, useful developer tools and websites, and some best and common practices that will make you a better front-end developer. So now to wrap up the story about Bootstrap 4, we saw some of the key changes that will happen and new additions in Bootstrap 4. Luckily, we know now that it's not actually going to be a complicated transition from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4. You have a full rundown on their website, and you can start planning for that. Now, the release date of Bootstrap 4 is unknown at this moment. There is no actual release date yet released. We know that there are going to be a couple of alphas, beta, a few release candidates, and then the production version. Now, that being said, I don't suggest you use Bootstrap 4 in a production environment yet because it's not that stable yet, and we don't know if anything might change yet. Will they add something completely new and stuff like that? So I would keep away from going to production with Bootstrap 4 and just using Bootstrap 3 for now. So now to talk about the tools that I've used. So you saw me using Sublime as my main text editor, which I think is probably the best text editor at the moment. It's really good, it's really fast, flexible, has a lot of options out of the box. Plus, you have this great community over at packagecontrol.io, which is basically the central repository for all Sublime extensions. And you can get whatever you want here, and it will probably make you code more efficient and faster, including things for Bootstrap. So for example, if you just search for Bootstrap, here we go, and you sort by popularity, you will see that the most popular plugin is actually Bootstrap 3 snippets, which allows you to kind of write shorthand snippets instead of the full code and make you even more faster. Now, another tool that I use frequently is Firebug. So Firebug is probably like the most used tool that I use ever. I even sometimes use it to like write complete CSS code in it. I also use it a lot for testing, performance information, and stuff like that, as well as debugging JavaScript most of the time. So you see me using Firefox, but you can use Chrome. It has a really cool developer toolbar. Firefox has actually gotten a lot better at it, and they do have this dedicated web developer menu option with all the possible like tools that they have, which again is getting quite better, and I especially like their kind of responsive design view right here. Another thing that I think everybody should read multiple times until you know it by heart is a code guide by the same guy who created Bootstrap. I read this like countless times, and I can read it more and more because it's really comprehensive, and it has everything that you need to know about front-end development and how you should write the code and what you should use and what not to use. So I think you should really bookmark this website, codeguide.co, and just go through this and learn everything that there is to know here, because it will actually make you a better developer. It will make you produce more standardized, more readable, and more usable code. Another thing that I will actually stress most of the time is making your website faster and optimizing the performance of the website. Now, there are countless articles, videos about this. You can always use Google PageSpeed as a reference. And of course, you can use their PageSpeed tool to test your website. So basically, it will literally tell you what is wrong with your website in terms of performance. And the reason that I'm stressing about this is because in order for you to be a really good front-end developer, you have to kind of learn how to make your website really fast, really optimized, not just for speed, but for performance, for stability, and for everything else. Because once you start writing like proper code, you will never have to fix bugs, you will never have problems with your clients or something similar. To wrap it up, I just want to shout out to a few websites that I visit daily, like to get information about some of the new technologies or interesting demos, which is CodeDrops is one of my favorite, and their playground section has like a really, really cool showcase of what can be done with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can take a look, you can get inspiration from here, and probably learn something along the way. Next up is Smashing Magazine, which you should definitely be reading if you're not. It's also like a blog about everything in terms of development. So there are a lot of in-depth reviews and discussions about some of the topics that might interest you. as well as one extra pixel, which again has a variety of other content, but basically it has a really cool development category which features some of the articles that I've written about Bootstrap 2. So this would be one of them. So it's for Bootstrap 2, but you can still read it because I think it's a good article to know about responsive design. So to wrap things up, thank you for watching this course and of course buying this course. This was my first time recording a course ever in my life. I hope you guys like it. I hope that I've managed to transfer some of the knowledge that I have about Bootstrap to you guys, and I hope you like the course, and I really hope that sometimes we get a chance to talk about your experience here and to basically give feedback to each other about Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4. So really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching the course, and I will see you sometime soon.